Panel 1 is going to focus on the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, the state's climate law that passed last session. We have an excellent group of speakers here who will first set the stage by providing a high-level overview of the law, drill down into what that law could mean for Westchester County and the towns and cities in the county, and third, explore how this massive shift to a clean energy economy could affect communities most affected by pollution and warming climate. Before we get started, I want to let everyone know that we have about a 15 to 20 minutes at the end for audience Q&A. We will then take a break before beginning panel 2. You may have received an index card when you checked in. If you have a question for any or all of the panelists, I ask that you write it down. To Angela or Sarah, can you stand up and wave your hands? There they are. They're in the aisles. Thank you. You can just raise your hand and they will come by and grab your card, or you can give you a blank card. They're going to be sorting them for me, checking for duplicates, and give them to me so that I can get to as many questions as we can. Now I am pleased to introduce our speakers. We have my friend and former colleague, Kara Allen, who's Senior Advisor at NYSERDA. Peter McCart, who's the Director of Energy, you guys can come up, Director of Energy Conservation and Sustainability at Westchester County. Nancy Seligson, who is Town Supervisor of the Town of Mamaroneck. Regina Volova, who is Senior Staff Attorney at the Pace Energy and Climate Center. And Anjali Sautoff, who is a PhD and Independent Environmental Health Consultant. So thank you all. We're going to have to split up on two sides, I think. Sorry. Okay. We can't quite all sit on one side. All right. We're going to start this with Kara. She's going to set the stage for us. So can you give the audience here a high-level overview of the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, including the process for implementation and what timeline you're looking at right now?
Hi.
Is it on?
Hello? Can you hear me? Okay. All right. I'll just hold it. Hi, folks. Thank you, Julie, and thanks for having me here today. It's a real pleasure to be together with the folks on this panel and with all of you in the room, because this is a process that is just getting underway. And so when we were actually doing some prep for today's event, the underlying point that I want to make to all of you here is this is an opportunity for you to provide input to the state. Because we are early staged in this process, and this is going to be a process moving forward over the next couple of years, it's a really great opportunity for all of you to let us know what it is you want to see, to provide us with some great local examples of how this can be done, and making sure you're informing us now as we start to move ahead. So the CLCPA, the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, was effective at the beginning of this year, and this sort of two components, as I like to kind of distinguish them. You have the climate leadership aspects and the community protection elements of the bill. So the climate leadership focuses on principally developing a scoping plan. The law is about 21 pages in total, but there's a lot of key material. So I'm really going to boil it down, and again, happy to get into a little bit more of the mechanics if folks have questions. But again, on the leadership side of the equation, the Climate Action Council, 22 members, all of them met on Tuesday. It's been quite a busy week. So again, glad to be here and sharing some fresh information with folks in the event that you were not able to join us up in Albany. So that council will be charged with producing a scoping plan, greenhouse gas scoping plan. The scoping plan will look at how we get to 40 by 30. So we are charged by the law with reducing our greenhouse gas emissions 40% by 2030. That's using a 1990 baseline. That goal is something that has been around for some time. It was in the state's energy plan and had applied to the energy sector. The governor expanded it under EO 166 when the federal government decided we would pull out of the Paris Agreement. But then exciting, we decided to ramp up a long-standing executive order target of 80 by 50 to no less than 85 by 50. Again, still against a 1990 baseline, and that is a no less than. The state is actively working to achieve carbon neutrality by mid-century. That is what the climate scientist community tells us we need to be doing. So again, the targets that we have in this law are in keeping with what the scientific community says is needed by mid-century. And as the 13th largest economy in the world, New York has a real opportunity to continue the leadership that we've shown to date, that all of you are showing in your communities every day and really be an example to others of how we get this done. So the scoping plan, the council over the next 2 years is charged with producing a draft. Once that draft comes forward, we will have a series of public comment hearings. Again, this is all stipulated by the law, but one thing that we heard this week from the Climate Action Council is that we are going to need ample public engagement. So that's why I began my message to all of you today with that note, that we need to hear from you. We want opportunities to do exactly what I'm doing today, communicate what is happening, and get your feedback. So the scoping plan will be informed by a couple of different groups. The senator mentioned just transition. That is a key central element, and that starts to get into some of the community protection aspects of the legislation. But helping the council in its work will be at least 6 advisory panels. Those advisory panels are more or less sector focused in nature. So you have a transportation panel, you have a power generation panel, an energy efficiency and housing panel, agriculture and forestry, very relevant to folks in this room, land use and local government, and in energy intensive and trade exposed industries. I think that rounds out 6, did I miss? Okay. And then just transition. So these are the advisory panels or working groups that will be providing recommendations to the council for them to consider in producing this scoping plan. If you're wondering, wait a second, who's on these advisory panels? It's okay, it's not yet known. We've been getting feedback from any number of folks, including from the Climate Action Council members themselves, as to who would be able to roll up their sleeves and really dig in, because we do envision these advisory panels being very active over the next 2 years to help really, I would say in even less than 2 years, because, at this point, we're into March and they have to provide their recommendations to the council for them to consider in putting forward the draft scoping plan. So it's really less than 2 years' time that these advisory panels will need to have these recommendations coming forward. One thing that was shared on Tuesday, and I think would be of benefit to folks here in this room, the advisory panels will be doing a lot of engagement with stakeholders. We do envision that even if you have an advisory panel of, say, a dozen or so, that was the recommendation that was mentioned, and again, it's still an ongoing discussion, but even if you have a dozen or so folks on an advisory panel, they're going to need to be engaging with stakeholders, with the community quite regularly. So again, if it turns out that you have somebody in mind for an advisory panel, they're not named to that advisory panel, that's okay. We do envision, again, there being a lot of need to come to do things like this, to have sessions where folks are able to come to the advisory panels and provide their thoughts and feedback for what these panels should be looking at and the policy recommendations that they should be putting forward to the council. So again, that's on the climate leadership side. The community protection side, as I mentioned, just transition and knowing the folks here in the room, that working group is a little unique in that it actually has several different tasks that are stipulated by the law. A lot of it is focused on workforce, but it's not exclusively on workforce. We do need to be looking at impacts to our communities. So again, some of the impacts that you're experiencing here, and as the senator said, you may be able to help provide some real guidance to other communities that will be experiencing the transition as we start to move forward with a clean energy, building out our clean energy economy. So there'll be need to look at workforce impacts, potential competitiveness issues, what our power generation sector will look like, what kind of plants might be vulnerable to closure as we start to move forward with that transition. So the Just Transition Working Group, like I said, there's a lot of specific tasks. The other thing that I would just note, and I think it's very important, is that working group also has, by the law, is stipulated to have 13 to 17 members. Oh my, see, I could talk all day and I'm being told I have 30 seconds left. Clearly, I spend my days living in this CLCPA bubble. So I guess I'll just say quickly that the Just Transition panel will have to have labor representatives, clean energy developers, environmental justice communities, and then at least 5 distinct energy intensive and trade exposed industries represented on this panel. So we do think that having that diverse makeup will be really key. I'd be remiss if my final point was not on our disadvantaged communities. There is a climate justice working group that will be consulting with the Climate Action Council. That group will be developing a list. First they'll develop criteria for identifying disadvantaged communities in New York State. That criteria will be used to produce a list of who is a disadvantaged community. And then the state and our activities, clean energy and energy efficiency activities, will need to benefit those communities no less than 35%, with a goal of 40%. And as I have seen, and I know that a lot of folks would like us to make sure that that is, the 40% is really the floor in that case, and that 40% covers an even broader suite of investments. But again, recognizing that some communities have been historically left behind and may be disadvantaged as we move forward with this transition, both clean energy transition, but also climate change and the impacts of climate change. We will be charged at trying to make sure that those communities are central to the work that we're doing and are benefiting from the work that we pursue. So thank you. I hope that overview was helpful, and I'm happy to dive in more.
You're not going to be busy at all. What Kara didn't even touch on is the fact that, meanwhile, the energy side of this is moving full steam ahead. And actually, I've been working this morning on getting out a letter in support of the governor's proposal to help us advance and accelerate the siting of renewable energy so that we can actually achieve all these goals.